The alcove behind the marble pillar had been Venetia Hartwell's sanctuary for 8 seasons. She pressed her back against the cool stone, feeling its chill seep through the thin silk of her gown, champagne untouched in her gloved hand. The Ashworth ballroom swirled before her like a fever dream, silk and scandal, diamonds and duplicity, the relentless machinery of society grinding forward without pause. From her hidden corner, she could observe without being observed, count the minutes until departure without enduring conversation, exist without truly being seen. It was an art she had perfected since she was 17 years old. The scent of hothouse roses drifted from nearby arrangements, mingling with the sharper notes of French perfume and candle wax. Music swelled from the orchestra, such a waltz that set couples drifting toward the floor like petals caught in a current. Venetia tracked the movements of Lady Octavia Sinclair, resplendent in pale rose silk that probably cost more than Venetia's aunt spent on household expenses in a year. Lady Octavia was steering the Duke of Thornwood toward the dance floor with practiced determination, her gloved hand possessive on his arm. The Duke moved with her, polite and distant, his dark head inclined as she spoke. Even from this distance, Venetia could see the careful blankness in his posture, the stance of a man performing duty rather than experiencing pleasure. She knew she should look away. She always looked away. But tonight, something made her linger. Perhaps it was the way the candlelight caught his profile, that sharp jaw, and those grave features that had haunted the edges of her vision for nearly a decade. Perhaps it was the knowledge that this was her final season. Her aunt had made that painfully clear this morning, standing in their cramped parlor with a letter from an employment agency clutched in her hand. Find a match or find employment. There is no third option, Venetia. I cannot support you indefinitely. Your father certainly cannot. The memory stung. Her father, once a brilliant merchant whose shipping company had dominated the eastern trade routes, now spent his days staring at walls and speaking to ghosts. The collapse of Hartwell Shipping 5 years ago had broken something inside Geoffrey Hartwell that no amount of time had mended. The waltz ended. Lady Octavia curtsied with feline satisfaction. The Duke bowed correctly, and then he looked up, on directly at Venetia's alcove. Her breath seized in her chest like a hand had closed around her lungs. Unthinkable. The shadows here were deep, carefully chosen over years of practice. The angle was obscured by the pillar's substantial curve. No one ever noticed her in this spot. She had tested it dozens of times across dozens of balls, making minute adjustments until she achieved perfect invisibility. But the Duke of Thornwood was staring at her as if she were standing in a shaft of brilliant sunlight. His eyes, she couldn't see their color from this distance, but she knew they were gray, the color of winter storms over the North Sea, held hers with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She stepped backward instinctively, but the wall stopped her retreat. Her champagne sloshed, splashing her wrist with cold liquid that soaked through her glove. She should move, find another corner, slip toward the retiring room before he was walking toward her. No, not walking. Cutting through the crowd with the kind of focused intent that made people step aside without knowing why. Lords and ladies parted before him like waves before a ship's prow, their conversations faltering as they registered his expression. His gaze never wavered. His face revealed nothing. Venetia's heart hammered against her ribs so violently she was certain he must hear it. This was wrong. This defied all logic. In 8 years of attending the same events, breathing the same air, existing in the same rooms, Aldrich Vane, the Duke of Thornwood, had never acknowledged her existence. Not a glance, not a nod, not the slightest flicker of recognition. She was a poor relation in borrowed gowns, a shadow among the glittering elite, a ghost that society looked through rather than at. Why would a duke notice a ghost? He stopped 3 feet away. Up close, he was devastating in a way that made her chest tighten. Not handsome in the soft, romantic way of poets, or the pretty way of society dandies. Handsome in the way of ancient statues, severe lines, unyielding structure, a face carved by grief-orphaned duty into something both beautiful and forbidding. His eyes were indeed gray, she confirmed now, but not the flat gray of clouded skies. These were the gray of steel, of storm clouds pregnant with lightning, of smoke rising from embers. There were faint shadows beneath those eyes, she noticed. Evidence of sleepless nights that no amount of aristocratic composure could quite conceal. A thin scar bisected his left eyebrow. She had never noticed that before, never been close enough to see. Miss Hartwell. He knew her name. The Duke of Thornwood knew her name. The world tilted sideways. She gripped her champagne glass harder to keep from swaying. Your Grace. The words came out steadier than she felt. Years of practice at invisibility had trained her voice to reveal nothing, her expression to remain pleasant and forgettable. I believe you've mistaken me for someone worth addressing. Something passed across those storm-colored eyes. Surprise? Amusement? Recognition of the defense mechanism for what it was? She couldn't tell. I've made no mistake. His voice was low, precise, designed to carry only to her ears. The kind of voice that commanded attention without ever needing to raise itself. Cor, I've been waiting 8 years to address you. The ballroom continued its glittering rotation around them. Somewhere, a woman laughed, high and artificial. Glasses clinked. The orchestra began another piece, something slower and more melancholy. Servants wove through the crowd with silver trays. The world continued exactly as before. But in Venetia's small alcove, time had stopped entirely. I don't understand, she said. No. He stepped closer, and she caught his scent. Sandalwood and something darker, like smoke after a storm, like secrets kept too long. I don't suppose you do. His gaze dropped to the champagne shaking in her hand, registering the spilled liquid, the nervous grip, the rapid pulse she couldn't hide at her throat. Then it rose again to her face, studying her with an intensity that felt almost physical, like being touched, like being seen for the first time in nearly a decade. You've been hiding in plain sight for 8 seasons, Miss Hartwell, behind pillars, in corners, along walls where the candlelight doesn't reach. His jaw hardened. Did you truly believe no one noticed? Venetia's mouth went dry. Her carefully constructed fortress of invisibility crumbled around her with every word he spoke. Everyone failed to notice, she whispered. That was rather the point. Not everyone. His slate-colored gaze held hers with an intensity that bordered on ferocity. Not me. Never me. The confession landed like a blade between them, sharp and unexpected and inconceivable to ignore. 8 years. He had been watching her for 8 years. Venetia searched his face for mockery, for cruelty, for any explanation that made sense within the ordered world she understood. Dukes did not notice women like her. Dukes did not track the movements of impoverished spinsters across countless ballrooms, cataloging their hiding places like a naturalist studying rare birds. Dukes certainly did not confess to such observation with the gravity of a man revealing state secrets. And yet here he stood, the Duke of Thornwood himself, looking at her as if she were the only real thing in a room full of painted facades. You're mistaken, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Or confused. Or, I'm none of those things. He said it without arrogance, simply as fact, the way one might state that the sky was blue or that water was wet. The first time I saw you was at the Pemberton Ball, 1823, while you wore a dress of faded blue, your mother's gown, hastily altered after mourning ended, the seams visible at the shoulders if one looked closely. You stood near the refreshment table for exactly 12 minutes before retreating to a window seat, partially concealed by velvet curtains. You read a book you'd hidden in your reticule when you thought no one was looking. Wordsworth, I believe, based on the size and binding. Venetia's blood turned to ice in her veins. She remembered that night with painful clarity, her first season. Her mother had died only 6 months before, and the mourning period had barely ended before Aunt Prudence insisted she enter society. The humiliation of wearing her mother's remade gown while other girls sparkled in new silk from Paris. The desperate escape into poetry when the loneliness became unbearable, when the laughter and music felt like knives against her grief. She had thought herself invisible even then. She had been wrong. Why? The question came out fractured, splintered by the weight of revelation. Why would you notice any of that? Why would you remember? The Duke's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded, surfacing beneath the controlled facade, before disappearing again, like a creature glimpsed in deep water. His hands, she noticed, had tightened at his sides, the only sign of tension in his otherwise perfect composure. Because you were the only real thing in the room. Before Venetia could process the enormity of that statement, before she could formulate any response at all, a voice cut between them like shattering glass. Your Grace, and there you are. Lady Octavia appeared at his elbow with the predatory grace of a hunting falcon, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. Her gaze swept over Venetia with the dismissive efficiency of someone cataloging furniture, assessing, categorizing, and discarding in the space of a heartbeat. I didn't realize you knew, Miss. Forgive me. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. The deliberate pause before seeking Venetia's name was calculated. A reminder of status, of worth, of the vast gulf between a duke's expected companions and whatever Venetia was. Miss Hartwell, Venetia supplied flatly, refusing to flinch. How charming. Octavia's tone suggested it was anything but. Her perfectly arranged blonde curls caught the candlelight as she tilted her head with feigned curiosity. Why, I wasn't aware your family still attended these events. Didn't your father's shipping venture collapse some years ago? Something about bad investments and unreliable partners, if I recall. Such a tragedy. The words were designed to wound, wielded with the precision of a stiletto. They succeeded. Venetia felt them sink between her ribs, finding all the old hurt that never quite healed. Lady Octavia! The Duke's voice carried a warning that made the other woman's smile falter almost imperceptibly. The temperature around them seemed to drop several degrees. I believe your mother is seeking you. I saw her near the east entrance not a moment ago. Is she? I hadn't noticed. But Octavia's eyes had narrowed, calculating the strange tableau before her with the instincts of a born society predator. A duke, a nobody, not a private conversation in a shadowed alcove, the ingredients of scandal simmering dangerously. Perhaps you'd introduce us properly, Your Grace. Miss Hartwell and I should become better acquainted, given your apparent familiarity. The implication was clear. Scandalous. Dangerous. Venetia could already imagine the whisper spreading through the ballroom like poison through water. Did you see? The Duke of Thornwood, speaking privately with that Hartwell creature. In the shadows, no less. What could they possibly have to discuss? Venetia felt the walls closing in. This was exactly what she had spent 8 years avoiding. Attention. Scrutiny. The cruel machinery of gossip that could destroy a woman with nothing but whispers and raised eyebrows. A woman of fortune could weather scandal. Why, a woman of nothing could be ruined by a single misinterpreted glance. There's nothing to become acquainted with, Venetia said quickly, stepping away from the Duke and his overwhelming presence. His Grace merely asked directions to the card room. I was happy to assist. If you'll both excuse me. Stay! The single word from the Duke froze her mid-retreat. It wasn't a request. It wasn't quite a command. It was something in between. A plea wrapped in authority, desperate beneath its composure. Miss Hartwell. His winter-gray stare held hers with something that looked almost like desperation, though surely a duke could not be desperate about anything. Please, stay. Lady Octavia's expression curdled like milk left in the sun. Her pretty features hardened into something ugly beneath their polished surface. The alcove that had protected Venetia for 8 years suddenly felt like a trap with no exit. Society's eyes were turning toward them now, drawn by Octavia's dramatic arrival, by the Duke's unexpected intensity, by the obvious tension crackling in the air between the three of them. She was visible. For the first time in 8 years, Venetia Hartwell was completely, devastatingly visible, and she had absolutely nowhere to hide. The next 20 minutes were a masterclass in social torture. Lady Octavia refused to leave, circling the conversation like a shark, scenting blood in dark waters. Other guests drifted closer, drawn by the spectacle of the Duke of Thornwood, paying attention to anyone, let alone a faded nobody in a twice-turned gown that had been fashionable 3 seasons past. The whispers spread outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Who is she? Hartwell? The shipping family? Didn't they lose everything? What could he possibly want with her? Venetia answered questions mechanically, her face a measured mask of pleasant neutrality. Yes, she was niece to Mrs. Prudence Hartwell. No, she had no immediate family remaining. Her mother had passed 5 years ago. Her brother Cornelius had left for the continent shortly after the bankruptcy. Yes, she had attended several seasons. No, she had no particular suitors. Each answer was ammunition, and she watched Lady Octavia collect it with gleaming satisfaction, storing away every vulnerability for future use. The Duke remained at her side throughout the interrogation, a silent fortress whose presence both protected and condemned her. Every moment he stayed increased the speculation. Every word he didn't speak spoke volumes. When he finally extracted them both, citing a need to discuss urgent estate matters with Miss Hartwell's aunt, a fiction so transparent it practically glowed, Venetia wanted to weep with relief and fury in equal measure. He led her through a side corridor, away from the ballroom's golden chaos, past servants who pretended not to notice their passing. The sounds of music and conversation faded behind them until they reached a small library that smelled of aged leather, dust, and forgotten conversations. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines gleaming dully in the light of a single candelabra. The door closed behind them with damning finality. You should not have done that. Venetia whirled on him, 8 years of restraint finally cracking under the weight of the evening's events. Do you have any idea what you've just caused? By morning, every tongue in London will be wagging about the Duke of Thornwood and the penniless Hartwell girl. My reputation. Your reputation as what? He leaned against the closed door, arms crossed over his broad chest, watching her pace the small room like a caged animal. As invisible? As forgettable? As so utterly beneath notice that you've been slowly disappearing for 8 years? The accuracy of it stole the breath from her lungs. That invisibility protected me, she managed. That invisibility was killing you. His voice softened unexpectedly, losing its aristocratic edge. I've watched it happen, Miss Hartwell, season after season, year after year. The light in your eyes dimming like candles running out of wax. The books getting smaller because your reticules grew shabbier. The corners you chose growing darker, more distant from the festivities. You've been fading, and no one has cared enough to stop it." Venetia's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. She would not cry. She would not cry in front of this unthinkable man who saw too much and said too much and made her feel things she had buried years ago beneath layers of practicality and resignation. "Why do you care?" she demanded. "What could I possibly matter to a duke?" The question hung in the dusty air between them, heavy with challenge, and something that felt dangerously like hope. "Because I have been in love with you since 1823. The world stopped. The clock on the mantel continued ticking. Dust motes continued drifting through the candlelight. Somewhere in the house, a servant's footsteps echoed on wooden floors. But for Venetia, everything had ceased to move. She stared at him, waiting for the jest, the clarification, the logical explanation that would make those words mean something other than what they appeared to mean. None came. "That's inconceivable," she breathed. "I assure you it isn't." He pushed off from the door and moved toward her, and she found herself unable to retreat. Inconceivable would be a relief. Inconceivable would have let me sleep through the night without wondering which corner you'd chosen at which ball. Inconceivable would have freed me to marry someone suitable and produce heirs and perform my duties without feeling like I was betraying something sacred. You don't even know me. I know you read Wordsworth when you're sad and Byron when you're angry. I know you prefer the left side of ballrooms because the candlelight is softer there and the curtains provide better concealment. I know you tap your finger against your glass when the music bores you, always in time with what you'd prefer to hear. I know that you smile, truly smile, not the polite mask you wear for company. Perhaps once per evening. Usually it's something a servant says rather than a guest. Venetia's hand rose unconsciously to her throat, where her pulse hammered like a trapped bird. You cannot have noticed all that. I noticed nothing else. His laugh was hollow. I edged with something that sounded almost like pain. Believe me, Miss Hartwell, I've tried. My grandmother has paraded every eligible woman in England before me for the past 3 years. Ever since my father's death left me with the full weight of the dukedom, I cannot see any of them. Only you. Always. You. 3 years since his father's death. That meant he had watched her for 5 years before that tragedy, and 3 years after. 8 years of silent observation, while his own life crumbled and reformed around loss. The confession hung between them, enormous and terrifying, and somehow beautiful in its impossibility. "What do you want from me?" Venetia whispered. "1 season." His pewter gaze burned into hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. Not as a shadow, not as a ghost, as yourself, visible, present, real. Let me court you publicly. Let me show you what your life could be if you stopped hiding from it. And in exchange? Nothing. His jaw tightened. At the season's end, if you feel nothing for me, you walk away. I'll ensure you have references, connections, whatever you need to build a life of your choosing. You'll never need to worry about employment agencies or charity, or depending on relatives who resent your existence. You lose nothing. I lose my invisibility. You gain a chance at something better. Venetia thought of her aunt's ultimatum, of her father sitting in his worn chair, staring at nothing, of the employment agency letter that promised a future of servitude and loneliness, of the slow fade into governess positions and quiet obscurity that awaited her if she continued on her current path. She thought of this man's storm-gray eyes, watching her across 8 years of ballrooms, seeing her when no one else bothered to look. 3 conditions, she heard herself say. His eyebrow rose. The scarred one, she noticed. The imperfection that made his severe face somehow more human. You're negotiating? You've loved a ghost for 8 years, Your Grace. The living woman may be considerably more difficult. Something like admiration surfaced in his features, warming them briefly before his controlled composure reasserted itself. Name your terms. First, my aunt must be told a version of events that preserves dignity. A formal invitation to serve as companion to your sister. I believe you have one. Nothing about courtships or confessions. My aunt would combust from excitement and tell everyone she knows. Done. Second, when this arrangement ends, I receive letters of introduction sufficient to secure respectable employment. No charity, no pity positions. Practical assistance that I've earned through service as your sister's companion. Agreed. Third, she stepped closer, close enough to see the individual threads of silver in his gray eyes. The moment your interest shifts to anyone else, this ends immediately. I will not be made a fool, Your Grace. I may be poor and invisible, and all the things Lady Octavia delights in pointing out, but I will not be humiliated. You have my word. He extended his hand, and the gesture felt weighted with significance. All three conditions. Do we have an agreement, Miss Hartwell? Venetia looked at his outstretched hand. Elegant, powerful, belonging to a world she had never dared imagine entering. She took it. So you know we have an agreement. His grip was warm and firm, sealing a bargain that would change everything. She just didn't know yet how much. By the following afternoon, Venetia found herself in a carriage bearing the Thornwood crest, watching London's fashionable streets give way to the imposing iron gates of Ashford Park, the Duke's ancestral estate on the city's edge. The morning had passed in a blur of hasty packing and hurried explanations. Aunt Prudence had received the Duke's formal invitation with barely concealed astonishment that quickly transformed into triumphant satisfaction. A companion to Lady Cressida Vane, the Duke's own sister. You see, Venetia, I always said your manners would serve you eventually. Her father had said nothing when she bid him goodbye. He rarely said anything these days, but his hand had tightened briefly on hers, and something that might have been awareness had surfaced in his empty eyes. Be careful, the pressure seemed to say. Don't hope too much. She was trying. She was failing. The house rose before her like something from a fever dream, growing larger with each turn of the carriage wheels. Pale stone columns reached toward a gray sky. Endless windows caught what little afternoon light filtered through the clouds, throwing it back in muted gleams. Gardens stretched toward distant woods, sculpted and manicured into patterns that spoke of generations of meticulous attention. It was the kind of residence that appeared in paintings, not in the lives of women who counted candle stubs and mended their own stockings by firelight. You've gone pale. Venetia startled. The Duke sat across from her in the carriage, watching her reaction with that unsettling intensity she was beginning to recognize. He had changed from his evening clothes into a dark blue coat that made his eyes appear more silver than gray. I'm merely adjusting my expectations. And what were your expectations? Something smaller. Something less. She gestured helplessly at the approaching grandeur, at the footman already materializing near the entrance, at the sheer overwhelming scale of it all. Less everything. His lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one. The first crack in his severe composure that she'd witnessed in daylight. My grandmother will be disappointed. She considers Ashford Park modest compared to our northern estates. There are more. 3 others. So plus the London townhouse. He said it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. The dukedom has been collecting properties for 600 years. We've become rather cluttered. The carriage stopped. Footmen in immaculate livery materialized. Doors opened onto a world Venetia had only glimpsed from the margins of ballrooms. Inside, the house swallowed her whole. Vaulted ceilings, painted with pastoral scenes of shepherds and goddesses, stretched overhead. Marble floors in patterns of cream and gray echoed beneath her worn half-boots, announcing her every step. Portraits of stern, vain ancestors judged her from gilded frames. Men in armor, women in pearls, children with knowing eyes who had grown up to rule small kingdoms of privilege. "You don't belong here," the portrait seemed to say. "We can see exactly what you are." "Miss Hartwell!" A young woman descended the main staircase with the energy of a barely contained storm. Dark curls bounced around a heart-shaped face, dominated by eyes the same gray as the Duke's, though warmer somehow, lit with curiosity and mischief. "You're finally here. I've been dying of curiosity since Aldrich's note arrived this morning. I'm Cressida. Don't curtsy. I hate formality. And please tell me everything about how you've managed to enchant my impossible brother." "Cressida," the Duke's voice carried warning. "Oh, don't scowl at me. You've been a miserable gargoyle for years, especially since Father died. And suddenly, you're bringing home mysterious women from balls? I deserve details." Cressida linked her arm through Venetia's, as if they'd been friends since childhood. "Come, I'll show you to your rooms before grandmother descends. She's resting, which means she's plotting. You'll need fortification before facing her." Venetia allowed herself to be swept along, glancing back once at the Duke. He stood in the entrance hall, watching her go with an expression she couldn't decipher. Something between hope and fear, and a vulnerability that seemed wrong on such a powerful man. "What has happened to you?" she wondered. "What broke you so badly that you spent 8 years watching instead of speaking?" The rooms assigned to her were larger than the entire ground floor of her aunt's house. Blue silk walls gleamed in the afternoon light. A 4-poster bed, draped in cream lace, dominated one end of the chamber. A writing desk sat positioned before windows, overlooking rose gardens that stretched toward a distant lake. A sitting room with its own fireplace and shelves of books opened through connecting doors. "This is the Sapphire Suite," Cressida announced, spinning slowly to take it in as if seeing it fresh through Venetia's eyes. "Our mother stayed here before she married Father. She died when I was very young. I barely remember her face, only her perfume. The suite has been closed for years." Her voice softened, losing some of its effervescent energy. "Aldrich specifically requested it be opened for you." Venetia's throat tightened. "That was kind. My brother is many things, Miss Hartwell. Cold, certainly. He's perfected that particular mask. Difficult, without question. Obsessively private, to the point where I sometimes wonder if he has any genuine confidants at all." Cressida squeezed her hand, her gray eyes searching Venetia's face. But he has never been unkind. Whatever exists between you two, and don't pretend nothing does. I saw his face when he read me his note this morning. I suspect it matters more than either of you has admitted. Perhaps more than either of you understands." She departed in a whirl of skirts and trailing questions, leaving Venetia alone in borrowed splendor. Through the window, she could see the Duke walking the garden paths below. His hands were clasped behind his back, his dark head bowed as if in conversation with the gravel beneath his feet. He moved through the formal patterns of hedges and flowers, like a man navigating a maze he'd memorized, but never escaped. Alone. Always alone. "Your brother's choices," the Dowager had said, "are not your shame to carry." But watching Aldrich pace those solitary paths, Aunt Venetia recognized something she hadn't expected to find in a Duke, the same loneliness she'd been hiding from for 8 years. She would find out soon enough what had caused it, and whether either of them could survive being seen. The Dowager Duchess of Thornwood was not what Venetia expected. She had imagined severity in physical form, a woman carved from marble and disapproval, towering and terrible. Instead, the figure who received her in the morning room was small, barely reaching Venetia's shoulder. Silver hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had been fashionable during the Regency. Her eyes, however, were anything but outdated, sharp as cut crystal, missing nothing. She wore dove-gray silk and a single strand of pearls that probably cost more than everything Venetia had ever owned combined. So the morning light streaming through tall windows illuminated her like a portrait, perfect and untouchable. "Sit," the dowager commanded. Venetia sat. For a long moment, the older woman simply studied her, the way one might examine a horse before purchase, checking for hidden flaws and weaknesses. Her gaze traveled from Venetia's simply dressed hair to her worn half-boots, cataloging every deficiency. "You are not beautiful," the dowager said finally. "No, Your Grace." There was no point in arguing facts. "You have no fortune, no connections worth mentioning, and a family name that has become synonymous with financial disgrace. Also correct. Your gown is at least 4 seasons old. Your gloves have been mended twice at the fingers, and your posture suggests you've spent more time carrying burdens than being carried." Venetia lifted her chin, meeting those cutting eyes directly. "Is there a question in this catalog, Your Grace? Or simply an inventory of my inadequacies?" Silence fell like a guillotine blade. Then, remarkably, the dowager laughed. A short, sharp sound of genuine surprise that transformed her severe face momentarily into something almost human. "Spine. Good. You'll need it." She gestured to a servant hovering near the door, who poured tea with mechanical precision. The scent of expensive salon filled the room. "My grandson has been obsessed with you for 8 years. Do you understand what that means?" "I confess I do not entirely understand it, no." "It means he has been unavailable for 8 years. 8 years of suitable matches rejected. 8 years of lineages left unextended. 8 years of me watching my grandson disappear into himself because some chit in a faded dress caught his eye at a ball." The dowager's voice hardened to steel. "Do you have any idea the damage you've caused simply by existing?" Venetia set down her teacup with measured precision. "I never asked for his attention." "No. That's precisely the problem. If you'd pursued him, I could dismiss you as a fortune hunter and have you removed. If you'd flirted or schemed, I could expose you as unworthy and be done with this farce." The dowager leaned forward, pearls swaying. "But you hid. You made yourself invisible. And somehow, that made you unforgettable. What do you want from me, Your Grace?" The truth. Those cutting eyes fixed on Venetia's face with the intensity of a surgeon examining a wound. Do you love him?" The question struck like a physical blow. "I barely know him. That's not what I asked." Venetia's hands twisted in her lap, the worn fabric of her dress rough beneath her fingers. How could she answer truthfully when she didn't understand herself? She felt something. Something that frightened her with its intensity. Something that had stirred when he confessed to watching her, when he noticed details no one else bothered to see, when he looked at her as if she were the most fascinating creature in any room. But was that love? Or simply the desperate gratitude of someone finally being seen? "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'm not here to trap him or manipulate him. I'm here because he asked, and because my alternatives were running out." The dowager studied her for another endless moment, weighing truth against suspicion. "My son, Aldrich's father, died 3 years ago," she said abruptly. "A hunting accident that was perhaps not entirely accidental." Venetia's breath caught. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "My grandson found him, held him as he died in a muddy field miles from help." The dowager's voice remained steady, but her knuckles were white where they gripped her teacup. "He has not spoken of it since. Not to me, not to Cressida. Not to anyone. He has been performing the role of Duke without actually living since that day, going through motions, maintaining appearances, managing estates, and attending Parliament, and doing everything required of his position. She paused, dying slowly from the inside while pretending to be perfectly well. Venetia didn't know what to say. What could anyone say to such a revelation? "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be sorry. Be useful." The Dowager set down her cup with finality. "I don't care if you love him yet. I care if you're capable of reaching him, of making him feel something beyond duty and grief and the endless weight of expectations. And if I can't, then this ends at the season's close, and you receive your references, and everyone continues as before." The Dowager rose, signaling the conversation's conclusion. Her small frame seemed to fill the room with authority. "But if you can, Miss Hartwell, if you can bring my grandson back to life." She paused at the door, turning back with an expression that was almost gentle. "Then perhaps I'll forgive you for the 8 years you stole, simply by being too afraid to be seen." She swept out, leaving Venetia alone with cold tea and the terrible weight of understanding. The Duke wasn't watching her for 8 years because he was patient. He was watching because he was just as afraid of being seen as she was. Two ghosts, haunting the same ballrooms, invisible to everyone except each other. 3 days passed before Venetia found herself alone with the Duke again. He had been absent for meals, buried in a state business that Cressida described with eye-rolling exasperation during their afternoon walks through the gardens. "He does this," she explained, linking her arm through Venetia's as they navigated a maze of trimmed hedges. "Hides in responsibility when emotions become inconvenient. Father's death made it infinitely worse. Now he practically lives in his study, emerging only when duty absolutely requires it." "Perhaps he simply has much to manage," Venetia offered. "He has stewards and secretaries, and an army of people paid to manage things. What he doesn't have is permission to feel anything." Cressida's gray eyes, so like her brother's, held unexpected depth. Father's death broke something in him. Or perhaps it just finished breaking something that was already cracked. Venetia thought about those words often over the following days. She explored the vast house, discovering libraries and galleries and music rooms filled with instruments no one played. She took tea with the Dowager, who interrogated her about literature and politics and current events with the rigor of a university examination. She helped Cressida sort correspondence and plan menus and perform the 1,000 small tasks that comprised a lady's daily life. But always, in the back of her mind, she wondered about the man who had watched her for 8 years and could not seem to look at her now. On the 4th evening, she discovered him in the library. It was long after midnight. She had been unable to sleep, the bed too soft, the silence too complete, and her thoughts too loud, and had crept downstairs, seeking something to read. The library at Ashford Park was legendary. 3 floors of books connected by spiral staircases, a cathedral of knowledge and imagination that made her heart clench with longing. She hadn't expected to find the Duke sprawled in a leather chair, cravat loosened, waistcoat unbuttoned, a glass of amber liquid dangling from his fingers. He looked undone in a way she'd never seen. Human. Vulnerable. Real. "Miss Hartwell." His voice was rougher than usual, slightly slurred. "Insomnia? The bed is too comfortable. I keep waiting for the mattress to develop sensible lumps." That ghost of a smile crossed his face again, the expression she was learning to watch for. The tragedy of luxury. She should leave. This was wildly improper. The two of them alone, at night, with him looking disheveled and human in a way that made her pulse quicken. Society would combust if they knew. Instead, she moved toward the shelves. What are you drinking? Brandy. My father's stock. I've been working through it systematically since his death. He lifted the glass, examining the amber liquid in the firelight. This is from 1805, an excellent year for cognac. A terrible year for everything else. That sounds like a rather slow form of self-destruction. Most destruction is slow. He gestured to a chair near his. Sit. Unless my company offends. Your company confuses. There's a difference. She sat anyway, tucking her feet beneath her borrowed dressing gown. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across his grave features. Your grandmother told me about your father, Venetia said quietly. His hand tightened on the glass. Did she? She said you found him, that you were with him when he died. Silence stretched like a held breath. What else did she say? That you haven't spoken of it since, that you've been performing the role of Duke without actually living. Venetia met his gaze. That you've been dying slowly from the inside. He laughed, a broken, hollow sound that hurt to hear. My grandmother has always had a flair for dramatic pronouncements. Is she wrong? The question hung between them. His silver-gray stare searched her face, looking for something. Judgment, perhaps, or pity. He seemed surprised to find neither. No, he said finally. She's not wrong. Venetia waited. The fire popped. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 1 in the morning. He didn't fall from his horse, Aldrich said slowly, the words emerging as if dragged from somewhere deep. Or rather, he did, but not by accident. He'd been drinking heavily, gambling away portions of the estate I'm still recovering. There were debts, dishonorable ones, and creditors circling like wolves. He paused, and she watched a muscle jump in his cheek. He rode out that morning knowing exactly what would happen. Now he made sure I was the one to find him so that it would look like an accident. So the title would survive even if he couldn't. Venetia's heart cracked. Aldrich. It was the first time she'd used his Christian name. It slipped out without permission, and she saw him register it. A slight widening of those grief-hollowed eyes. I held him for 20 minutes while he bled into the ground, he continued, his voice mechanical now, as if reciting a report. He apologized. Not for dying, for not being stronger, for leaving me to fix everything he'd broken. His features sharpened with barely controlled emotion. I told him I forgave him. I'm not certain it was true. Do you blame yourself? I blame everyone. Myself for not seeing the signs. Him for choosing escape over fight. Sagad for making duty feel like a prison sentence. He drained his glass. I blame the endless parade of suitable women who look at me and see a title instead of a person. I blame the expectations that crush anything genuine before it can breathe. And me? Venetia asked quietly. Do you blame me for hiding? His eyes met hers, and the raw honesty in them stole her breath. No, I envied you. He set down his empty glass on a side table. You found a way to disappear. I've been visible my entire life and never once felt seen. The fire had burned low. The library felt smaller somehow, more intimate, wrapped in shadows and confession. I see you, Venetia said softly. I don't understand you yet, but I see you. Something gave way in his expression. A wall falling, a defense finally breached. For a moment he looked young, lost, human. Or that, he said roughly, is precisely why I've loved you for 8 years. He stood abruptly, moving toward the door before she could respond. Good night, Miss Hartwell. Sleep well. He was gone before she could form words, leaving her alone with the dying fire and the echo of his confession. I see you. That's precisely why I've loved you for 8 years. She was no longer certain who was saving whom. The Belmont Ball was the first true test. 4 weeks had passed since that midnight confession in the library. 4 weeks of orchestrated appearances. Morning rides through Hyde Park, where Venetia discovered she had forgotten how much she loved horses. Afternoon calls with Cressida as chaperone, where she practiced the art of society conversation. Evening gatherings, where she stood beside the Duke instead of behind marble pillars. It was strange, being visible. Strange and terrifying, and exhilarating in equal measure. Society had noticed. Society was ravenous. "They're calling you the Invisible Duchess," Cressida reported gleefully, while helping Venetia dress for the ball. The woman who hid in plain sight until she captured the most elusive bachelor in England. It's wildly romantic. It's wildly inaccurate. Venetia watched in the mirror as Cressida fastened a strand of sapphires around her throat. "I haven't captured anyone. Haven't you?" Cressida's gray eyes met hers in the reflection. "I've seen how my brother looks at you, Venetia. I've never seen him look at anything that way. Not estates, not horses, not parliamentary victories. Nothing. These sapphires are too valuable. I shouldn't. They were mother's. Aldrich asked that you wear them tonight." Cressida's voice softened. "He never asks for anything. Not help, not comfort, not even the brandy father left him. He just takes it. But he asked for this, for you to wear our mother's jewels." Venetia's fingers quivered against the cool stones. "Cressida, he's been different since you came. Not happy exactly. I don't know if he remembers how to be happy. But present, like he's actually here instead of just going through motions." Cressida finished adjusting the necklace. "Whatever you're doing, don't stop." The Belmont residence blazed with 1,000 candles when they arrived. Venetia entered on the Duke's arm, acutely aware of every turned head, every whispered speculation. The scent of hothouse flowers mixed with expensive perfume. Music swelled from hidden musicians, and crystals glittered from chandeliers so elaborate they looked like frozen waterfalls. This was what visibility felt like. Exposure, vulnerability, the suffocating pressure of constant observation. How did he endure this his entire life? "Steady," Aldrich murmured beside her, his hand warm at the small of her back. "Remember, you belong here tonight." She didn't, but she lifted her chin and smiled as if she did. The first hour passed in a blur of introductions. Names and titles washed over her like waves, retreating before she could grasp them. Aldrich remained attentive without being possessive, guiding her through social minefields with subtle touches at her elbow. She remembered names. She answered questions. She performed adequately, perhaps even well. Then Lady Octavia struck. It happened near the refreshment table, where Venetia had retreated for a moment's breath. Octavia appeared with 2 other women, Lady Prudence Ashworth and Mrs. Helena Crane, forming a wall of silk and malice that blocked any easy escape. "Miss Hartwell." Octavia's smile could curdle cream. "How are you finding your elevation?" "Quite pleasant, thank you." "I imagine it must be overwhelming, going from mending your own stockings to wearing the late Duchess's sapphires." Octavia's eyes glittered. "One wonders how long such borrowed finery can last." "One wonders many things," Venetia replied evenly. "Curiosity is a common affliction." Lady Prudence tittered. Mrs. Crane looked uncomfortable. Octavia stepped closer, dropping her voice to ensure only their small circle could hear. "I've made inquiries, Miss Hartwell, about your family, your father's debts, your brother's disappearance." Her smile sharpened. "Did you think no one would look?" Ice flooded Venetia's veins. "My brother, Cornelius Hartwell, fled to the continent 5 years ago, 1 step ahead of creditors and scandal. Some whisper he's involved in rather unsavory activities abroad." Octavia's voice carried just enough to reach nearby ears. gambling, smuggling, perhaps worse. The Duke's grandmother will be fascinated to learn what stock her grandson is considering polluting the vain bloodline with. Venetia couldn't breathe. Cornelius. She hadn't spoken his name in years, hadn't allowed herself to think about her older brother, who'd left their family drowning in his debts, who'd vanished without goodbye or explanation, who'd chosen escape over facing the destruction he'd caused. "Well, you know nothing about my family," she managed. "I know enough." Octavia's triumph was barely concealed. "Enjoy the ball, Miss Hartwell. I suspect your remaining time in society will be quite brief." She swept away, leaving Venetia shaking. "They know. They'll tell everyone. The Dowager will hear. Aldrich will hear." She needed air. She needed to think. She needed... Venetia. Aldrich appeared at her side, his expression sharp with concern. "What happened? You've gone white." "Nothing." The lie tasted like ash. "I need air. Please." He guided her through glass doors onto a torch-lit terrace. The night air was cool against her flushed skin, carrying the scent of jasmine and distant rain. But it couldn't calm the storm inside her chest. "Tell me," he said quietly. "Lady Octavia has been investigating my family." Venetia's voice cracked. "She knows about Cornelius." Aldrich's features hardened. "Your brother. You knew." "I know everything about you, Venetia. I told you that." His pewter gaze held hers. "Your brother's choices are not your shame to carry. They will destroy me anyway." "Your grandmother, my grandmother already knows." Venetia stared at him. "What?" "I told her before I brought you here. Every detail, every scandal, every potential weapon our enemies might use." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "I will not let them hurt you. Do you understand? Whatever they throw at us, we face it together." But even as his words wrapped around her like armor, Venetia heard Lady Octavia's voice echoing in her mind. Borrowed finery, polluted bloodline, brief remaining time. She wanted to believe him. She wasn't certain she could. The confrontation came 3 nights later. Venetia had been avoiding Aldrich since the ball, taking meals in her room, declining evening gatherings, retreating into the invisibility she'd perfected over 8 years. It was cowardly. She knew it was cowardly. But Lady Octavia's words had cracked something open inside her, exposed all the fears she'd kept buried. "You don't belong here. You never did. This is borrowed time, borrowed finery, a borrowed life that will be snatched away the moment they decide you're not worth the trouble." On the 3rd night, he came to find her. She was in the library again. Their library, she'd begun thinking of it, though she had no right. Curled in her usual chair with a book she wasn't reading. The door opened without warning, and Aldrich stood in the frame like a storm about to break. "Son, you've been hiding." "I've been thinking." "You've been hiding." He closed the door behind him with quiet finality. "From me. After everything I said, everything I promised, you've retreated behind walls I thought we dismantled together. Perhaps some walls exist for good reason." He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping before her chair with an intensity that made her pulse jump. "Tell me what you're afraid of." "I'm not." "Tell me." His voice cracked. "Please. I cannot fight enemies I cannot see." The raw desperation in his eyes broke apart her composure. "I'm afraid you'll wake up." The words spilled out before she could stop them. "I'm afraid this dream will end, and you'll realize I'm exactly what Lady Octavia said. Borrowed finery, polluted blood, a mistake you made because you were lonely and grieving, and I happened to be there. Venetia. I'm afraid of my brother's sins becoming your scandal. I'm afraid your grandmother is simply waiting for the right moment to expose me. I'm afraid that 8 years of watching from corners was the closest I'll ever come to belonging somewhere." Her voice broke. I'm afraid of wanting this to be real. Silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Then Aldrich knelt before her chair. The Duke of Thornwood, one of the most powerful men in England, knelt at her feet like a supplicant, taking her unsteady hands in his. I've been afraid my entire life, he said quietly. Afraid of failing my title, afraid of becoming my father, afraid of feeling anything too deeply because depth means drowning. His thumbs traced circles across her knuckles. But the thing I feared most was never speaking to you. Never knowing if the woman I watched across all those ballrooms was real or simply a dream I'd constructed from loneliness. And now that you know? Now I know you're braver than you believe, sharper than they expect, more real than anything I've touched in years. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I am not dreaming you, Venetia, and I am not waking up. Tears spilled down her cheeks. This is madness. Then let us be mad together. He rose, pulling her with him until they stood inches apart. His hand cradled her face, wiping away tears with gentle fingers. I'm going to kiss you, he murmured, unless you tell me not to. She should stop him. She should protect them both from this accelerating collision. Instead, she rose on her toes and closed the distance herself. The kiss was nothing like she'd imagined. It was better. Soft at first, almost questioning, then deepening into something that made her bones dissolve. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering, matching the wild rhythm of her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, his forehead rested against hers. I love you, he said. I've loved you for 8 years, but I'm saying it now because you need to hear it spoken, not observed. Aldrich! A sharp knock splintered the moment. Your Grace. The butler's voice came through the door, apologetic but urgent. Your grandmother requests your immediate presence. Lady Octavia has arrived with information she insists cannot wait. Aldrich's expression hardened to stone. Stay here, he said to Venetia. I'll handle this. He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone with the taste of him on her lips and the terrible certainty that Lady Octavia had finally sprung her trap. Venetia did not stay. She followed at a distance, positioning herself in the shadows outside the drawing room, where voices rose and fell, like waves crashing against rocks. Through the cracked door, she could see Lady Octavia standing before the Dowager Duchess. A sheaf of papers was clutched triumphantly in her gloved hands. Confirmation from sources in Amsterdam, Octavia was saying, her voice ringing with satisfaction. So Cornelius Hartwell has been arrested for smuggling stolen antiquities. The scandal will break within the week. Every paper in London will carry the story, and his sister's name with it. Venetia's blood turned to ice. Cornelius, arrested. Scandal. This changes nothing. Aldrich's voice was steel. Miss Hartwell is not her brother. Perhaps not. But society will not distinguish. Octavia's smile was poison. Your Grace, surely you see the wisdom in ending this association before further damage is done. The Thornwood name has survived centuries of cultivation. Would you truly sacrifice it for a woman whose own brother is a common criminal? I would sacrifice considerably more than reputation. Aldrich. The Dowager spoke for the first time, her voice heavy with warning. Consider what you're saying. I have considered. For 8 years, I have done nothing but consider. He turned to face his grandmother. I will not abandon her. Then you will destroy us all. The Dowager rose, her small frame vibrating with fury. I warned you this would happen. I told you that girl would bring ruin. That girl is the only genuine thing I've encountered in a decade of performing emptiness. If protecting her means ruin, then let it come. You sound exactly like your father." The words fell like a blade. Venetia watched Aldrich flinch, a small movement, barely visible, but devastating in what it revealed. The dowager had found her target. "Your father chose sentiment over sense," the older woman continued ruthlessly. "Look where it led him. Debt, despair, death. Is that the legacy you wish to continue?" Silence swallowed the room. Venetia couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stand frozen in the doorway, watching the man she loved being torn apart by the very choice he was making for her. "This is my fault, all of it. My brother's sins, my family's shame, my stubborn insistence on hoping for things I was never meant to have." Before she could stop herself, she stepped into the room. "Miss Hartwell." Octavia's triumph flared brighter. "How convenient. You've saved us the trouble of summoning you." "Venetia." Aldrich moved toward her, but she held up a hand. "Your grandmother is right." The words cost her everything. "My brother's scandal will destroy you. Lady Octavia will make certain of it. Every door that's opened for me will close for you." "I don't care about doors." "But I do." Her voice cracked. "I care about you losing everything your father couldn't protect. I care about Cressida's prospects being ruined by association with my disgraced family. I care about your grandmother being proven right." "Venetia, please. I was invisible for 8 years because I knew my place." Tears streamed down her face, but her voice held steady. "I forgot that. You made me forget. But Lady Octavia has reminded me quite clearly where I belong." She removed the sapphire necklace with unsteady fingers, pressing it into his hands. "These were your mother's. They should remain in your family. You could be my family." The words broke apart what remained of her composure. "Goodbye, Aldrich." She fled before he could respond, before her resolve could crumble, before she could see the devastation she was leaving behind. By morning, she was gone from Ashford Park. By afternoon, she was back in her aunt's cramped house, so invisible once more, where she belonged. 4 days of silence nearly drove Aldrich mad. He had written letters she returned unopened. He had sent Cressida to plead his case, only to have the door closed in his sister's face. He had even attempted to call in person, but Venetia's aunt, suddenly discovering a spine she'd never previously possessed, had refused him entry with surprising venom. "You've done quite enough, Your Grace. My niece has finally recovered her senses. I suggest you recover yours." On the 5th day, Aldrich did something he had never done before. He begged. Not Venetia. She wouldn't see him. Not her aunt. She wouldn't listen. He went to the one person whose opinion might still reach her. Mr. Geoffrey Hartwell. Aldrich stood in the cramped parlor of the Hartwell residence, facing Venetia's father, a broken man in a threadbare coat, whose eyes still held flickers of the brilliant merchant he'd once been. The room smelled of dust and despair and dreams that had died quietly. Faded wallpaper peeled at the corners. A single candle guttered on a scratched side table. "I need your help." "A duke needs help from a ruined tradesman?" Geoffrey's laugh was bitter. "That's a first." "I need to speak with your daughter. She won't see me." Clever girl. Finally learned her lesson about reaching above her station. Her station is wherever she chooses to stand. Aldrich's voice roughened. "I love her. I have loved her for 8 years, and I will spend the next 8 proving it if necessary. But I need a chance to speak with her first." Geoffrey studied him with eyes too sharp for his weathered face. Despite everything, the bankruptcy, the shame, the slow erosion of his faculties, something of the shrewd businessman remained. "My son destroyed this family. My failures compounded the damage. Venetia has spent her entire adult life paying for sins she didn't commit." He leaned forward. Why should I believe you won't simply add to her burdens? Because I've already made my choice. Aldrich withdrew a folded document from his coat. This is a public statement, signed and witnessed, announcing my intention to marry Miss Venetia Hartwell, regardless of any scandal attached to her family name. I'm releasing it to the papers tomorrow morning. Jeffrey's eyes widened. That would destroy you. No. Losing her would destroy me. This is simply reputation. I have more than enough to spare. Silence stretched between them. Rain began to patter against the grimy windows. Then Jeffrey rose slowly, moving to a small writing desk. He scrawled something on a scrap of paper and pressed it into Aldrich's hand. She takes walks in Kensington Gardens every afternoon at 3 o'clock. Same bench near the Serpentine. Same corner where no one notices her. His voice softened. She's been crying herself to sleep every night since she came home. Don't make me regret telling you this. Aldrich gripped the paper like a lifeline. You won't, sir. I swear it. He was out the door before Jeffrey could change his mind. Tomorrow at 3, everything would change, one way or another. The bench near the Serpentine was exactly where Jeffrey had promised. Venetia sat alone, wrapped in a gray pelisse that made her nearly invisible against the overcast sky. So she was watching ducks drift across the water with the empty expression of someone who had stopped expecting anything good. Aldrich's chest tightened at the sight. He approached slowly, giving her time to see him, to flee if she chose. She saw him. He watched her stiffen, watched her hands grip the bench. But she didn't run. You found me. Her voice was flat. I will always find you. He stopped 3 feet away. May I sit? A long pause, then a small nod. He sat beside her, close enough to touch, but not touching. The ducks continued their lazy circles. Somewhere, a child laughed. The scent of damp earth and spring blossoms drifted on the breeze. I released a statement this morning, he said quietly, to every major paper in London. Venetia's head turned sharply. What statement? Announcing my intention to marry you, so acknowledging your brother's scandal, declaring that no amount of gossip or social pressure will alter my decision. Her face drained of color. Aldrich, no, it's already done. He turned to face her fully. By tomorrow, everyone will know. Lady Octavia will have her scandal, but it won't be yours alone. It will be ours. And I find I don't care at all. Your grandmother? My grandmother can adapt, or she can sulk. I've made my choice. He took her hands, holding tight when she tried to pull away. But I need you to make yours. I already made it. I left. You ran. There's a difference. His gray eyes burned into hers. You ran because you were protecting me, because you believed your presence would destroy me. But Venetia, don't you understand? Your absence is the only thing that could destroy me. And I've survived scandal and grief and my father's death. I cannot survive losing you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I have nothing to offer you. No fortune, no connections. A criminal brother, a ruined name. You have yourself. That's all I've ever wanted. It's not enough. Let me decide what enough is. He released one hand to cup her face, wiping tears with his thumb. Let me choose you, Venetia. Stop hiding. Stop protecting me from a fate I'm begging for. She was shaking. And the Dowager? Will accept my choice, or face the consequences of opposing it. His jaw set with determination. But I think once she sees we cannot be separated, she'll surprise you. My grandmother respects strength. She simply needs to see yours. Venetia closed her eyes. I'm terrified. So am I. He pressed his forehead to hers. Why, but I would rather be terrified with you than safe without you. A sob escaped her throat, half laugh, half surrender. You unthinkable man. Is that a yes? She opened her eyes, and for the first time since the Belmont Ball, he saw hope surfacing in their depths. It's a yes, she whispered. God help us both. It's a yes. He kissed her then, in the middle of Kensington Gardens, in full view of anyone who cared to watch. Let them watch. Let them whisper. Let Lady Octavia choke on her own venom. Venetia Hartwell was his. And he would spend the rest of his life proving she belonged exactly where she was. The Whitmore Ball was the grandest event of the season. The cream of London society had gathered in glittering array. The curious and the hostile alike waited with bated breath to see what the Duke of Thornwood would do. They were not disappointed. Venetia arrived on Aldrich's arm wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that made the sapphires at her throat blaze like captured stars. The same sapphires she had tried to return, the same sapphires his mother had worn on her wedding day. The Dowager Duchess of Thornwood walked behind them. That alone sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. The Dowager, supporting this match? Unthinkable. But there she was, silver-haired and imperious, nodding at acquaintances as if daring them to comment. They reached the center of the ballroom, just as the orchestra concluded its current piece. In the sudden silence, Aldrich turned to face the crowd. Lords, ladies, honored guests, his voice carried across the glittering assembly. For those who have been following the recent speculation regarding my personal affairs, I have an announcement. Venetia's heart hammered against her ribs. 8 years ago, I saw a woman at the Pemberton Ball. She wore a faded blue dress and read poetry in a window seat when she thought no one was watching. His voice softened. I watched. I watched for 8 years, too afraid to speak, too convinced that happiness was something that happened to other people. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. 3 months ago, I finally found the courage to approach her, to tell her the truth, to beg for a chance that I did not deserve. He turned to Venetia, taking both her hands. She gave me that chance, and she has given me something far more valuable since. What's that? Someone called from the crowd. Aldrich smiled, a real smile, from full and warm and utterly transformed. A reason to stop surviving and start living. He dropped to one knee. Gasps erupted throughout the ballroom. Lady Octavia, standing near the refreshment table, turned a shade of green that clashed terribly with her gown. Miss Venetia Hartwell. Aldrich's gray eyes shone with emotion. I have watched you from afar for 8 years. I have loved you in silence for 8 years. I have dreamed of this moment for 8 years. He withdrew a ring from his coat, a simple band of gold, with a single sapphire that matched her necklace. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not because society approves, not because scandal demands it, but because I cannot imagine a future worth living without you in it. The ballroom held its breath. Venetia looked down at the man kneeling before her, the Duke who had seen her when no one else bothered to look, who had chosen her when every sensible option pointed elsewhere, who had publicly staked his reputation on a woman society had dismissed as invisible. Yes, her voice rang clear and strong across the silent room. Yes, I will marry you. He slid the ring onto her finger and rose to sweep her into his arms. The kiss that followed was decidedly improper, too long, too passionate, too real. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some whispered. Lady Octavia departed abruptly, her social standing crumbling with every step, for backing the wrong side had consequences in society, and everyone could see which way the wind now blew. But none of it mattered. Venetia Hartwell was no longer invisible. She was seen. She was chosen, and she was loved. 2 years later, the Pemberton Ball was exactly as Venetia remembered. Glittering chandeliers, swirling silk, the same corner window seat where she had once hidden with Wordsworth and loneliness. Tonight, she sat there by choice. Aldrich settled beside her, pressing a glass of champagne into her hand. Feeling nostalgic? Feeling grateful? She leaned against his shoulder. This is where it started. Where you first saw me. I see you every day now. He kissed her temple. It never gets less miraculous. Through the window, she could see their daughter, barely 6 months old, being bounced on the dowager's knee while Cressida made ridiculous faces. The dowager, who had opposed this match so fiercely, now threatened to spoil her great-granddaughter beyond all reason. News had arrived last month that Cornelius had been released from custody in Amsterdam. Charges reduced, due to cooperation with authorities. He had written to Venetia for the first time in 5 years, asking forgiveness. She had not yet decided whether to grant it. But she had written back. It was a beginning. She's going to be utterly spoiled, Venetia murmured, watching the dowager coo at the baby. She's going to be loved. Aldrich pulled her closer. That's all that matters. The orchestra struck up a waltz, the same waltz that had played the night she finally stopped hiding. Dance with me, he said. Always. They took the floor together, no longer invisible and no longer afraid. And somewhere in the crowd, a young woman in a faded dress watched from behind a pillar, hoping, perhaps, that she too might someday be seen.